smash the like button. Subscribe if you're brave enough to question the system. And drop a comment if you think you know how this ends. Because once you step into this case, there's no turning back. The blue lights arrived first, slicing through the quiet English night like a blade. Rain slicked the pavement outside a modest home in Northamptonshire, pooling beneath the tires of police cars that rolled in without sirens, without warning. Neighbors peeked through curtains, their faces pale in the glow. Inside the house, the air was heavy, stale with grief and disbelief. A young boy lay lifeless. His name was Jordan. He was just 4 years old. For the officers on scene, it felt like the end of a tragedy. For Donna Anthony, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Donna was a single mother, small in stature, soft-spoken, exhausted by years of struggle that had already left their marks. She had lost another child years earlier, her baby son Michael, under circumstances that had never fully made sense. 2 losses, 2 children, 1 mother. In the harsh light of an investigation, that pattern would soon become everything. As the body was taken away, questions formed quickly, quietly, and then all at once. Detectives stood in the living room, scanning walls decorated with family photos. Donna sat on the edge of a sofa, her hands trembling, her eyes swollen and empty. She answered questions slowly, carefully. She cried. She broke down. She apologized for things no one had accused her of yet. The house felt less like a home and more like a crime scene by the minute. The first hours after Jordan's death were marked by confusion. There were no obvious signs of wrongdoing, no clear cause, no weapon, no struggle. But as the night stretched on, something shifted. The focus narrowed. The questions sharpened. Someone asked about Michael. Michael had died years earlier, just 11 months old. At the time, doctors had ruled it a sudden, unexplained death. Tragic, but not criminal. That was the official record. That was supposed to be the end of it. Now, it was the beginning. Detectives revisited old files, yellowed with age and dust. Medical reports that once read as uncertainty were reinterpreted as suspicion. Words like unexplained and inconclusive took on darker tones. Patterns were drawn where none had been drawn before. 2 children, same mother. In the corridors of the police station, that simple fact echoed louder than any evidence. Donna was brought in for questioning. The interview room was small, cold, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She sat alone at a metal table, a paper cup of water untouched in front of her. The officers across from her weren't cruel. They didn't need to be. They spoke calmly, methodically, like men assembling a puzzle they believed already had an answer. They asked about her past, her relationships, her mental health, her financial struggles, her moments of anger, her moments of despair. Each question chipped away at something unseen, reshaping the story not around what happened to Jordan, but around who Donna was. Grief became suspicious. Inconsistencies became lies. Silence became guilt. Experts were brought in. Medical specialists who hadn't seen the children while they were alive, who hadn't known Donna, who hadn't been there. They reviewed reports and photographs, listened to summaries, and drew conclusions that felt certain on paper, even if reality was anything but. The term Munchausen syndrome by proxy entered the conversation, an accusation as devastating as it was complex. A theory suggesting a caregiver might harm a child to gain attention or sympathy. It was controversial, difficult to diagnose, and once spoken aloud, impossible to erase. Donna heard the words and didn't understand them at first. Then she did, and when she did, the room seemed to tilt. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a suspect with a profile. As days turned into weeks, the case hardened. The investigation stopped expanding outward and instead folded inward, tighter and tighter around Donna. Other possibilities faded into the background. Medical uncertainty became medical certainty. Doubt became confidence. When Donna was arrested, the shock rippled through her family like an aftershock. Handcuffs clicked shut around wrists that had once cradled her children. Cameras flashed outside the station. Headlines followed. A mother accused of the unthinkable. The courtroom was packed on the first day of trial. Journalists filled the benches. Observers whispered as Donna was led in, her face pale, her eyes downcast. She looked smaller than she had in the police station, swallowed by the gravity of the room. The prosecution painted a portrait not of events, but of character. They spoke of past behavior, of perceived patterns, of psychological theories presented as fact. They argued that two tragedies were not coincidence, but design, that Donna's grief was rehearsed, that her sorrow masked something darker. The defense pushed back, pointing to the lack of direct evidence. No witnesses, no forensic proof, no confession. They spoke of medical uncertainty, of how science evolves, of how conclusions drawn years later can be dangerously misleading. But the weight of suspicion was heavy. Jurors watched Donna closely as testimony unfolded. They studied her expressions, her posture, the way she held her hands. Every sigh, every tear, every moment of stillness was interpreted, consciously or not, as part of the story. Was she crying too much? Or not enough? Experts testified with confidence, using language that sounded precise, authoritative. Charts were displayed. Terminology filled the air. To the untrained ear, it sounded like truth. And yet, beneath it all, cracks began to form, small at first, almost invisible. A medical opinion contradicted another. A timeline didn't quite fit. A certainty wavered when questioned closely. But those cracks were easy to miss when the narrative felt so complete. Two children, one mother, a past under scrutiny. As the trial neared its conclusion, the atmosphere inside the courtroom grew tense. Donna barely slept. Each night, she replayed moments from her life, searching for something, anything, that could explain how she had ended up here. She thought about Michael, about Jordan, about the promises she'd whispered to them when no one else was listening, about the future she'd imagined that would now never come. When the jury left to deliberate, the silence was unbearable. Hours passed, then days. When they returned, Donna stood. Her legs trembled. Her heart hammered, so loudly she was sure the entire room could hear it. The verdict was read. Guilty. The word landed like a physical blow. Donna's knees buckled. Somewhere behind her, someone cried out. The judge's voice continued, but the sound blurred, as if underwater. Life imprisonment. As she was led away, Donna turned her head, searching the gallery for a familiar face, for reassurance, for proof that reality still existed somewhere beyond this room. What she found instead were eyes filled with judgment, curiosity, and in some cases, quiet doubt. Prison closed around her like a door slammed shut on the rest of her life. But far from the courtroom, far from the headlines, something else was happening. Files were being reopened. Medical opinions quietly questioned. Whispers of uncertainty began to circulate among those willing to look deeper. And buried within the evidence, overlooked, dismissed, or misunderstood, was a truth that would threaten to unravel everything. Because when someone finally asked whether past behavior should decide present guilt, the answer would change more than just one verdict. And when a single piece of evidence resurfaced, it would force the system to confront a terrifying possibility. Donna Anthony might not be guilty at all, but proving that would mean challenging everything the case was built on, and not everyone was ready for what that would expose. If you think this is where the story ends, it's only just beginning. The prison gates closed behind Donna Anthony with a sound she would later describe as final, absolute, and unforgiving. Inside, time didn't move forward, it pressed down. Days blurred into nights, marked only by counts, meals, and the echo of footsteps in concrete corridors. She was no longer Donna the mother. She was Donna the inmate. Donna the woman convicted of killing her own children. Outside those walls, the case settled into public memory as something solved. Another tragedy explained. Another dangerous mother removed from society. The headlines faded, replaced by new scandals, new fears. For most people, the story was over. But for a small and growing group, it was just beginning to unravel. The first doubts didn't come from journalists or lawyers. They came from doctors. Years after the conviction, medical understanding began to shift. Conditions once labeled unexplained were being revisited with new research, new technology, and new caution. Sudden infant deaths that had once been attributed to foul play were now being linked to natural causes that earlier science simply couldn't detect. A pediatric pathologist reviewing older cases paused when she reached Donna Anthony's file. The certainty in the trial transcripts didn't match the ambiguity in the medical records. Words like probable and consistent with had been treated as definitive. Assumptions had been stacked on assumptions. She flagged the case. That flag landed on the desk of a legal charity specializing in miscarriages of justice. Their volunteers were used to uphill battles, to cases everyone else had forgotten. But something about Donna's file felt familiar, too familiar. They saw it again and again: vulnerable defendants, complex medical evidence, and a justice system that preferred a simple narrative over an uncomfortable truth. They began digging. What they found was unsettling. The expert testimony that had carried so much weight at trial was no longer universally accepted. The diagnosis used to frame Donna as dangerous had become deeply controversial, with critics arguing it was being overused, misunderstood, and weaponized in courtrooms. Even more troubling were the inconsistencies in how the deaths had been investigated. Timelines that didn't align, symptoms that had alternative explanations, conclusions that ignored uncertainty in favor of confidence. The deeper they went, the more the foundation of the conviction seemed to crack. They reached out to independent medical experts, not ones tied to the original case, not ones with reputations to defend. Doctors willing to say 3 dangerous words: "We don't know." Those experts reviewed everything from scratch: autopsy reports, hospital notes, witness statements. They asked questions no one had asked before. Could Michael's death have been caused by an undetected infection? Could Jordan's collapse have been linked to a rare but natural medical event? Could both tragedies exist without a criminal explanation at all? The answers weren't simple, but they were honest. And honesty, it turned out, was the most threatening thing of all. When Donna's legal team filed an appeal, the response was swift and cold. The system does not like being questioned. Prosecutors defended the original verdict fiercely, warning that reopening the case would set a dangerous precedent. If past convictions could be undone by evolving science, how many others would fall? Inside prison, Donna knew none of this at first. Appeals moved slowly. Letters were filtered. Hope was rationed. She spent her days replaying the trial in her head, haunted not just by the verdict, but by the moments she hadn't understood at the time. The confidence of the experts, the way jurors nodded along, the feeling that her life had been decided by people who never truly saw her. When her lawyer finally told her about the appeal, she didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She asked one question: do they believe me now? The answer was complicated. As the appeal process began, old evidence was dragged back into the light. And under scrutiny, it didn't look the same. The court was forced to hear new testimony, this time from experts who challenged the certainty of the past. They explained how medical understanding had evolved, how earlier conclusions were no longer considered reliable, how the diagnosis that had defined Donna as dangerous was now widely disputed. The prosecution pushed back hard. They accused the defense of exploiting grief, of rewriting history. They argued that even without medical certainty, the pattern was too suspicious to ignore. 2 children, same mother. But for the first time, that argument didn't land as cleanly as it once had. Judges asked questions, difficult ones. What if coincidence wasn't impossible? What if uncertainty had been mistaken for guilt? What if past behavior had unfairly shaped present judgment? Outside the courtroom, public opinion began to shift. Journalists revisited the case, this time with skepticism rather than certainty. Headlines changed tone. Where once there had been condemnation, now there were question marks. A mother jailed. Evidence disputed. Justice uncertain. The appeal hearing was tense. Donna sat quietly as arguments unfolded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't look at the judges. She didn't look at the prosecution. She stared straight ahead, focusing on her breathing. When the decision came, it felt unreal. The conviction was ruled unsafe. Donna Anthony's sentence was overturned. The words echoed through the courtroom like a shockwave. For a moment, no one moved. Then sound rushed back in, gasps, murmurs, the scrape of chairs. Donna felt her legs give way as relief and grief collided. She wasn't celebrating. She was mourning the years she could never get back. But freedom, it turned out, was not the end of the fight. The ruling didn't declare her innocent. It declared the verdict unreliable. A subtle but brutal distinction. The prosecution announced they were considering a retrial. The threat loomed once again. Outside prison, Donna faced a world that didn't know what to do with her. Some people saw a woman wronged by the system. Others still saw a monster who had slipped through the cracks. The stigma clung to her like a shadow. As the legal battle continued, new revelations emerged, ones that would shake the case even further. Evidence that had been overlooked, expert opinions that had been selectively used, doubts that had been buried under certainty. And then, quietly, something even more explosive surfaced. Internal communications. Documents suggesting that investigators had fixated on Donna early and filtered everything through that assumption. Notes that revealed alternative explanations had been dismissed, not disproven. It wasn't just a case of bad science. It was a case of tunnel vision. As the possibility of a retrial hung in the air, the justice system faced a choice. Admit error or double down. For Donna, the stakes were no longer just freedom. They were truth. Because if the system refused to acknowledge how it had failed her, it could happen again, to someone else. Another vulnerable parent. Another grieving family. Another life defined by a verdict built on assumptions. And just when it seemed like the case might quietly fade away, a final decision was made. One that would either close the door forever or expose the system in a way it could no longer ignore. That decision would come next. And when it did, it would force everyone to confront a question far more dangerous than guilt or innocence. What happens when the system itself is on trial? The announcement came without spectacle. No dramatic press conference. No sweeping statement of accountability. Just a brief notice from the Crown Prosecution Service confirming what many had begun to expect and others had quietly feared. There would be no retrial. The evidence, they said, no longer met the threshold required for a realistic prospect of conviction. For Donna Anthony, the words landed softly, almost gently, yet their impact was seismic. The case that had defined her for years, shaped every relationship, every introduction, every whispered judgment, was officially over. But closure, she would soon learn, is not the same as peace. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Journalists stood shoulder to shoulder, microphones poised, eager to capture the face of a woman the system no longer called guilty, but never quite called innocent either. Donna stepped into the daylight slowly, her expression calm but distant, as if she were watching herself from somewhere far away. She did not smile. She spoke carefully. "I lost my children," she said. "Then I lost my freedom. I hope no one else ever has to lose both." That was all. For some, it wasn't enough. The public reaction split along familiar lines. Advocates for justice reform pointed to Donna's case as a warning, a chilling example of what happens when certainty outruns evidence, when assumptions replace inquiry. Medical professionals debated openly, admitting that past confidence had been misplaced, that the science had been pushed beyond its limits. Others remained unconvinced. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Comment sections filled with doubt. How could two tragedies happen to the same family without explanation? How could the system get it so wrong? The truth was uncomfortable. It required accepting that not every question has an answer. That grief doesn't always come with villains. That the justice system, built to deliver clarity, sometimes manufactures it when none exists. Donna tried to rebuild her life quietly. She moved away from the area where her name still carried weight. She avoided interviews. She stayed offline. Simple things, walking into a shop, making small talk, felt foreign after years of being watched, judged, categorized. Freedom came with conditions no one talked about. She attended counseling. She learned how to sleep again. Some nights, she woke gasping, heart racing, her mind replaying moments from the trial she couldn't erase. Other nights, the silence was worse. There were no children's voices, no bedtime routines, no second chances. What haunted her most wasn't prison. It was the realization that her past would always be used to explain her present, no matter how many courts cleared her name. The case sparked wider reflection within the legal system, though change came slowly, grudgingly. Guidelines around expert testimony were reviewed. Courts became more cautious about relying on disputed medical theories. The phrase "beyond reasonable doubt" was re-examined with renewed seriousness. But for every reform discussed, there were countless cases already decided. How many others, Donna wondered, were sitting in cells built on certainty that no longer existed? Years later, an independent review acknowledged that serious mistakes had been made in her prosecution. The report stopped short of an apology. Institutions rarely apologize. To do so would mean admitting not just error, but responsibility. Donna read the report alone. It didn't bring relief. What she wanted wasn't validation. It was understanding, a recognition that the system had failed to protect both her and her children, not by missing a crime, but by inventing one. In private moments, she questioned herself in ways no court ever could. Could she have done something differently? Asked different doctors? Pushed harder for answers? The guilt of not knowing, of never knowing, was a weight she carried quietly. The justice system had demanded certainty from her when science could not provide it. And when certainty couldn't be found, it had chosen a narrative instead. That narrative nearly destroyed her. As time passed, Donna became a symbol, though she never asked to be one. Her case was cited in law lectures, medical ethics debates, documentaries about wrongful convictions. Her name joined a list of others whose lives had been reshaped by the system's need for closure. But symbols don't feel pain. People do. One evening, years after her release, Donna attended a small gathering of families affected by miscarriages of justice. They shared stories not for sympathy, but for survival. Listening to them, she realized something unsettling. Many of their cases began the same way. A tragedy, a search for answers, a rush to judgment. The details differed, but the pattern was familiar. When investigators decide who you are before they decide what happened, the outcome is almost inevitable. Donna's case ended without fireworks. No courtroom confrontation. No dramatic confession. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the past could not be trusted to explain the present. And that may be the most frightening ending of all, because it leaves us with a question that has no easy resolution. If past behavior can outweigh evidence, if grief can be mistaken for guilt, if certainty can be manufactured when truth is unclear, then how many verdicts rest on stories rather than facts? Donna Anthony walked free, but the system that judged her never truly stood trial. And somewhere, right now, another case is unfolding, another set of assumptions forming, another life hanging in the balance. If this story made you question how justice is decided, and who decides it, then you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe and stay with us as we continue uncovering the cases that challenge everything we think we know about guilt, innocence, and the cost of getting it wrong.